He would say things that would speak directly to the soul of the people. And he would say things such as, God is within us all. There's something eternal, there's something untouchable within us all. And if we just access that dimension of ours, we'll be able to meet God there. I've decided to speak tonight about Meister Eckhart, and some of you might have known about Meister Eckhart from before. A great Christian mystic from the 13th century, and one of the most touching, heart-opening, uplifting, inspiring mystics that I have personally encountered through his writings, basically because he lived 800 years ago. I haven't met him personally, but his writings, and a particular part of his writings, his sermons, which address people generally, address spiritual seekers in general, are very full of a mystical touch. There's something in these writings, there's something in the way Eckhart describes God, describes the encounter with God, that's very, very inspiring for anyone who is a spiritual seeker. Eckhart was born in 1260 in Thuringia, in what is now Germany. And we don't have many details about his life or about his, let's say, more external aspects of his life. He was born in a time when people weren't putting everything about them on Facebook. And very little is known about him, but we know, for example, that when he was 15, he joined the Dominican order. So quite early on, he had this calling towards a monastic or a religious life, rather. He joined the Dominican order, one of the big orders back at the time in Catholic Europe. And he started learning Catholicism, learning theology, becoming gradually more and more familiar with the Christian doctrine. Now, he was a very bright human being, very intelligent, and with a lot of gifts, with a lot of endowments. So quite easily he started growing within the order. And at first he began teaching. He was actually invited to teach in Paris, at the University of Paris, which was a big thing. Back in the days, Paris was probably the only university center in the world. And he then gradually started having more and more responsibilities within the Dominican order, all the way to becoming a sort of coordinator, a sort of leader or administrator of a great part of the German Dominican order. So he was responsible for the entire Dominican order across a very big region of Germany, Thuringia, and then later on Saxony, and even Bohemia. So he expanded, he became so trusted by the religious authorities that he was given this very delicate role of coordinating all the monasteries, all the religious houses, all the different groups that existed within the Dominican order. And he was very good at that. He proved to be very good. He was a very diplomatic character. He could easily solve conflicts, and he had this ability to stay in between people and to connect things in a way that would work out harmoniously. And he was very appreciated for that. But besides this, in the meantime, so although he was very actively engaged into the more worldly dimension of the religious life, he was very much a scholar and a scholastic, first of all. You see, scholasticism, for those of you who don't know, was, let's say, a trend within the Catholic Church in the medieval times and even later on, that would use a lot of philosophy, that would use a lot of reasoning, a lot of logic, in order to prove the Christian doctrine, in order to understand various aspects of the divine life. So it was this pursuit of understanding the divine through reason. And it was the peak of scholasticism back then. There is the great figure of scholasticism, Thomas of Aquinas, who was for a period contemporary with the young Meister Eckhart, and who was very solid. Yeah, he would write these very large treatises about Christianity from a very philosophical perspective. They would have a lot of debates about what is the nature of God, what is the nature of the soul, what is the nature of life, how many angels can sit on top of a needle. All sorts of interesting things were occupying the minds of these scholars. But you see, what is particular to this approach, to this religious spiritual approach, is that it's very much an intellectual one. So they would take, for example, the great intellectual history that the Greeks have left as a heritage, and they would use all the logics, all the Aristotelian concepts, and they would just apply them to Christianity. And although it's very rich and it's very, to a certain extent, very speculative and also very profound and also very complex, it stays, if you approach it, if you read it, if you engage with it as a spiritual seeker, it gives you a sense of insufficiency. It gives you a sense that, yeah, everything that you say here is nice, but it's just mind stuff. It's just somebody's mind assuming things, speculating about spirituality, speculating about religion, speculating about God. But it's not like going straight into the experience of God and leaving that experience within one's own self and then coming out with some understanding that is resulting from this direct contact with the reality that you're talking about. It would just be an assumption, a kind of a distant study. You would look at a subject that would seem unapproachable, yeah, because God seems unapproachable, so high up there, so transcendental, and then from this little perspective of us as humans, and with our little tools, little mental tools of the intellect, such as the reasoning capacity, the logical capacity, and so on, we would start inferring, making some assumptions, making some deductions about that reality without actually touching it directly with our heart and our soul. And as Eckhart was involved with this, and he was very good at it, he would just write a lot about all the major scholastic themes and subjects of the day. And he would gradually get to the understanding that this is somehow reaching a dead end, that is not taking one directly into the experience, into the understanding of God. So he started looking into what can be done, what other resources, what other functions, what other capacities or abilities we have within us, within our souls as humans, to discover God other than the intellect, other than the reason. And although not leaving this very intellectual approach aside, he would still engage with it very actively because he was just very, very intelligent. He would start seeking for something that would actually take him into direct contact with God beyond the mind, into an actual experience. Now, we don't know this from his writings. He doesn't say this directly, but it's very obvious in the way his writings evolved through the years. So at the beginning, he was just a pure, very good, top-level scholastic. And then gradually, he started doing something very interesting. He started, instead of just writing big books that were, let's say, the norm of the days for such people, he would start preaching. He would start going into the church and he would start talking to people. And he would start, initially he would start talking first to his Dominican brothers. So he would go into the Dominican convents and he would just speak, give a sermon there to the friars, to the brothers, to the monks who were living in the monastery. But then gradually he started expanding and he would get in touch with more lay people. People that would not have this constant, organized, disciplined, spiritual, religious life, but would be interested. They were interested, as people were back in the day, they were interested to discover God, to have a direct contact with God. And he would start giving these sermons, and for the first time, which is somewhat odd in the history of the Catholic Church for that time, you'd have this great intelligent being who would have very high chances of getting to the very top ranks of the church. He would suddenly or gradually give up this interest of seeking some form of some functions there, or seeking some higher stages in the hierarchy, and he would instead just take the desk, so to say, and speak directly to the people. And this is very interesting. When you read the sermons, and he was very smart because he transcribed all these sermons beforehand, he would start speaking to the people about God, about the nature of God, about how God can be reached, how can he be realized. How can one get into this direct experience with God? And this is why I'm saying he did not directly express in his writings that he had certain mystical experiences. He didn't keep a diary, or if he did, it didn't survive. We don't know that. But he would just, this inner experience of his would be very much reflected in the way his writings would transform. And this is where things get very interesting, because he would go into the church and speak to ordinary people about very elevated realities, about very elevated aspects of God. It was not the normal, let's say, usual sermon that you get at the end of the Mass, when the priest would just take a little quote from the Bible, or would speak on the occasion of the celebration that or the feast of the day, the religious feast of the day, and it would be something that you would expect to hear. Yeah, always be good, always do good, always love Jesus, always love Mother Mary, and this and that, everything that was said before. But Meister Eckhart would come there and he would say radical things. He would say things that never were said before. He would say things that would speak directly to the soul of the people. And he would say things such as, God is within us all. There's something eternal, there's something untouchable within us all. And if we just access that dimension of ours, we'll be able to meet God there. And we should stop focusing on asking God for things. We should stop praying just superficially and just having this very superficial relationship with God, in which we're not actually analyzing who we are in connection to God. We just have a belief about God, that God is there, a supreme being who can just do some magic and sort out things for us in the way that we beg him to do. He would say, no, stop all this, because it's just superficial. It doesn't take you anywhere. Instead, start looking within and start purifying yourself. Start taking out all these desires that you bring before God, asking God to give you I don't know what goods, I don't know what kind of life. And if you really want to meet God, just take out any attachment from within you, take any impurity from within you, take anything that occupies the space of your consciousness and just be. Just be. And in that being, you'll discover God. And these were very novel teachings for the church. They still are, pretty much, from what I can tell. and at the same time very impactful. People would listen to him and they would be completely mesmerized. They would be completely touched by what he would say. And very soon he would start growing into popularity. So it was around the second half of his life already when he started doing all these things, giving these sermons in a more direct, more accessible way, and speaking much more directly about the mystical experiences. And he would impact a lot of people. He would become very popular. He would be called to speak in different parts of Europe back then. And obviously, the church was a bit suspicious of this when they noticed, oh, there's this guy gaining a lot of popularity here and telling people many unusual stuff. And back in the day, I mean, consider that we're speaking about medieval ages, yeah? When although the spiritual aspirations that people had were very genuine and very profound, at the same time, there was this monopoly that church had over all spiritual matters. And they would impose these ridiculous rules about what people are allowed to do and not allowed to do, and would give also all sorts of rigid understandings about what life is and how one should live it. And then Meister Eckhart comes with this very free perspective, and it was free because his own soul was free. He would have, and it was very clear in his writings, he would have this profound understanding of God, very profound. You read it and you feel like you learn about God. It's very rare that this happens with somebody who writes about spirituality. Yeah, many people write about spirituality and they describe their own experiences with spirituality and they describe their own methods, but very few dare to go and touch on the hottest topic, the Supreme Absolute, with such uncompromising vertical attitude that Eckhart did. He was radical. Radical in the sense that he was completely transcendental. You would read his sermons, and even though you probably don't get 75%, 95% of what he says there, at the end of it, you get an immense feeling of mystery and depth. You get an immense feeling of being closer to something indescribable by the mind. Something which feels very, very high, very elevated, that touches on the divine. And it gradually, it's like giving you these tasters of what God is and how does it feel like. And sometimes he would be off, but many times he would be completely on.
Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content on spirituality, Tantra and more.
And if you want to sign up for our online classes or for our retreats, you can see our website on the description below.